Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm reviewing Elton John's 1986 album Leather Jackets. This was his 20th studio album, following on from Ice on Fire and preceding Reg Strikes Back. It reached number 24 in the UK, but only number 91 in the United States. Recorded in England and the Netherlands, it was his first album to include no top 40 singles since Tumbleweed Connection, and it was his poorest charting album in his career. AllMusic gave it 1.5 stars out of 5. So, what do we think about what's going on in Elton's life at this time? Now, I've got to say that I haven't looked at this album for quite a long time, but when I go back to it and listen to it, and when I look at videos of him being interviewed at the time and photographs of him, my first reaction was one of profound sadness. What has happened to Elton? What's happened to the Elton of Ticking, the Elton of Leave On, the Elton of I'm Still Standing? Things were going badly for Elton at this time, both in his personal life and in his professional life, and I think it shows through on this collection of songs. He'd been touring for virtually the whole of his professional life. He'd been under constant pressure to produce new albums, and I think he'd hit a low. And it's just really sad. When you see interviews of him, he doesn't look happy, and you've got to feel very sympathetic towards him. And thank goodness that he was able to turn things round and give us another 3 decades of great music. So, what do we think about this album? It was the last to be produced by Gus Dudgeon, and another important feature here, it was the last time Elton used a grand piano on the album before he turned to electric. Elton, interviewed in 2006, called this his least favourite album, referring to it as a total disaster. And he admitted he wasn't well when he was recording it. One reviewer said it was full of awful songs and awful production. And there certainly is a feeling of rushed compositions on this one. Elton using a variety of lyricists as well, Bernie, Gary Osborne, and even Cher on this one. So let's just have a look at the album itself. Now, they've gone for this image of Leather Jackets, which is the first song on the first side. And I suppose the artwork here, a bit Andy Warhol style, I suppose, is fairly effective. But of course, there's no picture of Elton on there. Now, when we turn it over, we have this really awful photograph here of some members of the band. And if you look at Elton there, he does look really sad. There's no joy in this picture at all. I know they're posing, but it's just a sad picture, I think, and that's a real shame and perhaps reflects most of what's going on in the album. Now, the inner sleeve has a fairly decent design, I suppose, but when you turn it over expecting to find some lyrics, all we get are the details of the musicians on each song. One thing I do like on this is the actual design of the centre of the record. I think that's quite effective, but overall it's got the look of a fairly rushed package. Now, I should say, of course, that as with any Elton album, there's always going to be 1 or 2 decent tracks on it. No album is a write-off, even Victim of Love. So I've enjoyed going back over these songs, some of which I had forgotten how they went, I've got to say, because they weren't that memorable. So let's get into the action now and see what we find on side 1. Now, track 1 is the title track, Leather Jackets. This actually came from the Ice on Fire sessions. The whole thing has kind of a disco feel about it. And the lyric is apparently one of Bernie's about people being obsessed with dead rock icons, but I don't think it's particularly strong. And we seem to get a series of kind of disconnected phrases about fashion and music. I don't really think the message gets across on this one. The melody is rather forgettable. Elton's voice is not sounding very strong or confident on this. The other thing I noticed about this album, it's got a very twangy bass. I don't even notice that. I don't know whether it's a technique that's being used or something to do with the production, but it just seems to twang rather irritatingly throughout this album. I can't hear Elton on the piano here, although he is on the Yamaha on this one. And the thing I've written down here is this the Elton of Ticking? You remember that great track from Caribou? He sits down at the grand piano, and it's a brilliant lyric, it's a brilliant melody, great presentation. And it's all just a little bit sad, this one. So as an opener, I'm going to put this as an average Elton track. I'm going to give it 4 out of 10. Track number 2 is called Hoop of Fire, again from the Ice on Fire sessions. Elton's voice on this one sounds a little bit like Single Man, actually. Quite distinctive from that period, and not unattractive. This is one of the singles from the album. There's kind of a doo-wop feel about this with the backing vocals, although it all sounds a little bit tired. It's about a difficult relationship. What do we say? Your pulse that races when I'm close reads like a hoop of fire. The whole thing is rather forgettable, I'm afraid, and the album hasn't really got off to a very good start here. I'd say this is a below average track. 3 out of 10 for this one. Not quite a skip over, but not far off. Now, we had an unusual pairing for track number 3 because Cher came in to write some lyrics. The track is Don't Trust That Woman. And I don't think actually a man would have got away with these lyrics because they're incredibly anti-woman. So it's odd that a woman should have come up with them. Elton here is on electric piano, and there sounds like there's some steel pans in the background of this one. A decent refrain, quite engaging actually, and I quite like the vocal line on this, although it all sounds a little bit of a struggle. It's about an untrustworthy woman, and some of the lyrics, got to say, a little bit on the corny side. Get this one. Don't trust that woman, boys, 'cause she'll hurt you and turn you into little toys. Well, what do you make of that? It's not quite Bernie Taupin at his best, is it? Again, the whole feel of this is not bad, actually. I would say this was certainly one of the better tracks on the album, and I'm going to award it a 6 out of 10 and say it's good. Track 4 is Go It Alone, another Elton and Bernie composition from the Ice on Fire sessions. Now, this has a violent opening. Note the twangy bass again on this one. It's a real rocker and it's in a minor key. It's actually about broken relationships and quite an angry lyric. This home's a whole lot better without you. It's driving, it's thrilling, and on the refrain we get some good harmonies. Elton gives a decent vocal for this one. I would compare it with something like Nobody Wins from the Fox, a track I rate quite highly, actually. I think I gave that one 8 out of 10. And also something like I Don't Want to Go On With You Like That, another sort of angry track in a minor key. So I don't mind this one at all, actually, and I'm going to rate it as a good track and say it's 6 out of 10. Now, side 1 closes with Gypsy Heart, again from Ice on Fire sessions. This is a slow burn, a country feel, with some fairly cheesy synthesizers on this. It's got a slow beat, a long verse, and a rather forgettable refrain when we eventually get there. There's lots of chord changes through the refrain to get back to the verse. The lyric isn't really anything to write home about. The drums on this are quite thudding. It's a bit like a giant stumbling downstairs very slowly. Not much to recommend on this one, I'm afraid. Below average Elton territory here, and we'll give this one 3 out of 10. So a couple of decent tracks on that first side, but we've got a 4, 3, 6, 6 and a 3, giving us only 22 for a side of vinyl, which is not one of Elton's better sides of vinyl. Let's move on to side 2. Now, side 2 opens with Slow Rivers. This is a duet with Cliff Richard. This was actually done in the concert with the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, but didn't make it onto the record because of contractual issues. Now, the metaphor here is about a relationship again. It works, actually. It's quite a strong lyric, this one, and the production is fairly classy. Elton and Cliff's voices sound pretty good together. There's a decent verse and chorus, with Cliff mainly taking a harmony to Elton's lead vocal. You're a sinking ship with no place to go. It works quite well. It's an unconventional song. It's not really a toe tapper. Not really maybe something you'd sing along to, but it does work as quite an unusual duet. The mood of it I would compare with something maybe like Cold as Christmas. It's got that sort of feel to it. There's an interesting video that was done on the Noel Edmonds show with Elton in Sydney, I think, and Cliff in London, and they've kind of blended them together so it appears as if they're in the same place. So probably the most effective track on the album, this one. I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10, very good. Now, track number 7 is an interesting one because I've got the 12-inch of this one, Heartache All Over the World. And now Elton has been quoted as saying this is the worst song he ever recorded. And yet some people who have been subscribing to my channel have commented that this is one of their favourite tracks. So over to you to decide, really. Elizabeth Rosenthal, in her book on Elton, calls this song synthesizer overkill. There's no Elton keyboards on this one. It's all synthesizer backing. It's about a man chasing a woman, but obviously not being very successful. You can go from Tokyo to Rome looking for a girl. And we have this girls, girls, girls background vocal, which is a little bit on the corny side. It's not a bad tune. It's got this heavy 80s rock drumming, which gets a little bit boring after a while. But the refrain does drive on, albeit a little bit predictably, but not unpleasantly. So it's a reasonable listen, this one. I've actually quite enjoyed going back and hearing it. Sorry Elton didn't like it too much. I would say it's a fairly good track, and I would give this one 5 out of 10. Now, Roger Taylor and John Deacon from Queen turned up to play on the next track, that's track 8, called Angeline, and they may have wished they hadn't bothered because this is a very disappointing song. Now, it takes 1 minute and 10 seconds for anything to really happen here with just oh-oh-ohs going on. It's an unexciting verse, mainly on one note. And it never seems to reach a refrain. It never seems to actually get anywhere. It's about a woman called Angeline, surprisingly. I would compare it maybe with something like Crystal, the song, which is more effective than this one. But the whole thing is really dulled throughout, and it's virtually a skip-over track, this one. I would be hard-pushed to whistle the melody of this one from memory. It's a little bit like I felt it was a bit like a Hot Chocolate song when I was listening to it. Anyway, well, you can decide what you like about this. For me, it's disappointing. I'm going to give it a 2 out of 10. Gary Osborne was the lyricist for track number 9, Memory of Love. Now, Elizabeth Rosenthal, in her book again, describes this as a pitiful ending to their songwriting partnership. I'm not sure it's that bad, but what we have here is slow, heavy, lolloping drums, a rather disjointed verse. It feels a little bit like a 21 at 33 song. It's rather jerky and uncomfortable. In the refrain, we get this pleading vocal that is slightly touching. Again, not unpleasant. Never take love for granted is the kind of message from it. But again, the whole thing is a little bit of a struggle. And I'm going to say this is an average track and give it 4 marks out of 10. Now, track number 10 is Paris, which was a single again from the album. It's an unusual melodic setting here. And the song does draw you in. The lyrics create the atmosphere of Paris. The music doesn't, I don't think, but it doesn't necessarily have to. It's about when I get to Paris. There's some pleasant images in there, like the left bank is crying. The synthesizers may be a little bit too much and they could have been ditched, but some good grand piano sounds on this. It almost sounds like a single man song in a way. And maybe Elton, just with him and the piano, this could have been quite effective. I would compare it to Blue Avenue, which comes up on Sleeping with the Past, which is a very good song, I think. So for me, this is one of the best on the album. I'm going to rate it as a very good song. If you haven't heard this for a while, give it a listen and see what you think. Very good song, 7 out of 10. Now, the vinyl closes with track 11, I Fall Apart. And again, Elizabeth Rosenthal in her book calls this the most disappointing song of Elton's career. I think what she means by that is that it could have been so much better, and I would agree with that. Elton's using quite a high voice on this, and the lyrics are quite powerful. I fall apart with the threat of indecision hanging in my heart. Again, we're in relationship territory here. And I would compare this song with something like Sacrifice or Shoot the Moon, both very moving and powerful ballads. I would say it needs some more prominent piano from Elton rather than this sort of synthetic soundscape. The synthesizers building up this soundscape Elton's performance is emotional, the lyrics are okay, but it's a missed opportunity, this, because it could have been so much better. It's a decent song, this one, and I think a different style of production could have made this one maybe an 8, whereas I'm going to mark this one as a good song and give it 6 out of 10. Let's have a look at the marks for that second side: 7, 5, 2, 4, 7 and 6. So I would say 3 reasonable tracks on there, and a couple that are disappointing and 1 poor track, giving us a total of 31 marks for the second side. So the whole thing scores 53 marks over 11 tracks, giving us an average of 4.81 marks per track. So let's have a look at my song rating so far. We're getting on for 300 songs now rated. Those are what I've got at the top: Come Down in Time, Skyline Pigeon, Goodbye Rick Road and Your Song. Nothing from this album even in the 8. So it's a while until we get to the 7s, and the new entries there for me, once we get to them, are going to be Slow Rivers and Paris. So those are the 2 I gave 7 marks out of 10. Then at the bottom of my league table, we do have a new entry coming in there, Angeline, which I've only marked 2 out of 10. So that comes in there. We've still got a couple down there with Zero, Solar Prestige and Passengers. So where does this album fit in on average marks per track? Well, I've still got Tumbleweed up there on 7.1. So we've got to scroll down a little bit until we come to Leather Jackets. And there it is, coming in 18th place with 4.82 marks per track. Still down the bottom there, we've got Victim of Love with just 3. So an interesting position for that one. Some decent tracks, but some misfires. Now, I thought you might be interested in this little graphic. This is the marks I've given to each album, and this is chronological. So we can see there that the really strong start to Elton's career, those first 5 albums. Then it drops, and this is Caribou here. Don't forget, I haven't yet reviewed Honky Chateau. And then there's the Victim of Love down there in 79. But we're starting to get this period here in the early 80s when things weren't going so well, but starting to climb again. And that's what's interesting. When we get into the 2000s, Elton's albums again pushing up into really good quality markings. So that's my verdict on Leather Jackets. What's your verdict? There are some B-sides for me to look at. I will do that in my follow-up video, which will include a selection of your comments as well. So please post those below. Subscribe if you want more of these reviews, and I'll see you next time. Don't forget, we're still standing.